This is part two of my conversation with Dave Luke, where we discuss the challenges of running your own business, the nature of resilience, the importance of purpose, the future of humanitarianism development and the world in general. And is as somewhat a tradition on this podcast, we hear Dave's advice for a 2-year-old girl growing up in the world today. Part one is out now, so go and have a listen to that too. Here we go.
Dave, I just want to come back to the commercial acumen piece that you mentioned in terms of your motivation for applying to the big American universities in the first place. And now here you are running a couple of different businesses. How did you go about getting and building that commercial acumen? Because this feels like a gap in the transition process out of the military.
First, it did start as part of that career transition where they had opportunities to go and do small business finance modules. So I went through a few of those. I then went to Manchester Business School and did their Advanced Management Achievement course, which had some more financial accounting and business strategy. So that did some nuts and bolts, how to read profit and loss, how to look at different financial statements. Then the next element was how a budget got put together. I learned very quickly during my humanitarian program management as country director about how to budget and spend money. So I would commercial acumen is an interesting terminology. I would break it down into there's budgeting and effective resource management and execution is one thing. Actually having a sound business model is something else, because you need to ensure that you have sufficient demand, and then you need to transition that demand into efficiently and effective execution. But doing it well allows you to be efficient, but then potentially allows you to be a good value for another organization because they see that you're not over expensive. But value definition is probably one of the most important but overlooked elements. People think it's all about price, and too often people go a price point orientated because they're stuck to a budget. And that's something that we abide by, is to provide good value for money so that we make sure that we can transparently justify what we're doing and how we're doing it, but also articulate what we're trying to do really accurately when we go into the procurement processes or when we go into client consultations, and speak to them and be like, okay, cool. Are we absolutely sure we agree on what we're trying to achieve and the costs associated with trying to achieve that? Because if not, we'll rescope. That gives you the commercial acumen of to make sure you are pointed in the right direction and you're acting in the same right way. Then there's the other element of actually hammering spreadsheets. And I've had that question asked a few times. I came as part of that transition point, and that's why I labored it so hard to start the conversation. I did an awful lot of mind maps and then an awful lot of thinking in that transition period for 2 years. And one of my key takeaways was I do not want to ever touch a spreadsheet in my future careers. If I have to touch a spreadsheet, I've failed. Next, what I really want to do is as little writing as possible. If I have to communicate, I want to use whiteboards and big diagrams. But what I really want to be doing is having my value articulated verbally. And that was the hierarchy of how I wanted to project myself through business. Needless to say, fucking upside down, isn't it? And I live in spreadsheets. I live in spreadsheets now because that hyper efficient resource management is what keeps things alive. You can't absolutely. I am not taking credit in our businesses or that for actually being responsible for the commercial management, but everybody has got to understand where the money comes from, how it gets spent well, and why. And if that value ethos, which I talked about a minute ago, and understanding how the budgeting and resource management works, if they aren't key across the team, people then don't understand how prioritization works. So they're the nucleus of what happens. And my point here is, I say nucleus on purpose because you've got to get them right. But the assumption is your strategy and your leadership will take that cell and put it in the right place. Yeah, in that analogy.
Yeah, that's so. I think a couple of things stand out for me there. The first one is you've just described the difference between basically financial literacy and commercial acumen. I think those are two different things, and I'm glad you've drawn that distinction. And I think the financial literacy one is something that people who are disciplined and motivated can go and get educated in reasonably straightforwardly, right? You find the course, you watch the YouTube video, whatever it is. The commercial business acumen, I think, is a much harder thing. That sales and business, to understand a market, understand how you can create your section of that market, and then sell convincingly and consistently, is the really big challenge in all of that. For me, anyway, that's the bit I find you've got to be more creative in that space, right? You don't need to be as creative with the financial literacy, unless you're an accountant, in which case creativity, I think, is often a very successful differentiator for their business models. But
I just pick up on one thing there. Or we talked about this transition, where it comes from, and to finish answering your question. So it does come from practice, but I don't advocate from learning by financial mistakes, because that becomes mission critical quite quickly. But the point is, you can make small mistakes and hopefully recover from them quite quickly. It's much easier to spend other people's money poorly than spend your own poorly. And not to spend your own poorly. Very quickly you learn these lessons, where when it genuinely, it's not hurt your own pocket, when it fundamentally challenges the sustainability of the business, you got to get these decisions count. And especially at smaller scales, it means that the swings are bigger. So if you're in a very large organization, there's more capacity, dare I say, resilience for mistakes to be made. In small businesses, you tend not to have that much resilience, because your pipeline, your cash flow, all of that is much, much tighter. So you're more susceptible to mistakes or shocks. So you've got to get it right quickly. I think, though, I was going to say lucky. Well, we'll stick with lucky. I've done different types of commercial transactions, from selling TV shows to startup investment, doing different investment rounds to run nature-based solutions in America, as well as more traditional public procurement, direct business to customer sales in a humanitarian consultancy. And they're all complementary, but it means I've learned from them. But they're also different ethos orientated, where the core business is about spending public money or other companies' money well to get a good solid outcome. Whereas actually in TV land, it's about making TV to make as much money as possible. And actually, for me, I am not as motivated by projects when they become commercially driven. That's what I've actually learned over the years, that the service and the mission is the intrinsic motivation more for me. So don't get me wrong, back to Daniel Pink, he says, and rightly, money will never motivate. It will demotivate if you haven't got enough, and will distract if you don't feel you're paid your worth. It will never motivate you to go that extra mile. And I, again, 2012, 2014, read that, and I was like, yes, that rang true with me.
That's a great quote. I think it's back to the point, isn't it, of service. And we haven't talked about purpose specifically or explicitly, but having that element of, am I doing something that I consider to be worthwhile? And I think that's something that comes across a lot for me with the conversations I have with people who have had a first career in uniform. I don't know any of them that are motivated by money in and of itself.
Mate, I think a really important discussion point is here, though, is where financial risk tolerance sits. And I think this does bleed into more general adaptation or more general application in businesses as well. We talked about marriage a second ago as what seems like a bit of an aside and potentially distraction, but it's not, because you can be as motivated as you like, but actually you don't make decisions for yourself anymore. So risk sits with you, your family. And I use this as an example because more people will be able to empathize with this than they will about risk tolerance in a business. Because you try to explain risk to businesses and transfer tolerance, or what is a common risk understanding. People are like, what the fuck are you talking about? You take it to the marriage analogy, it's cool. I've got to make money because we've collectively got to sustain the family, and the decisions I make have an impact on my family. Everyone can understand that. That's directly transferable to business. It's exactly the same. I've got to do either my revenue generation or my maintenance of efficiency and effectiveness to keep a profit margin. It's in business or organizations, the majority of time, leadership decisions, resource management. A lot of the time, it's a little bit abstract because it doesn't actually change your daily quality of life unless you own the business. Whereas in marriage, it actually really will. So therefore, the consequences may not actually be any more grave or not, but they feel it. And I think that's the point, that risk management and financial risk management need to be better articulated in businesses so that people can understand the true resilience of their business and therefore maintain being motivated to keep the business strong. So I don't advocate for a hyper profitable growth business like the majority of Americans shout. I say it's about a resilient business to keep allowing us collectively and whatever organization that is to keep doing as much good as possible for as long as possible in as many places as possible. That's a resilient business. And that's where the motivation and a financial acumen or business financial management motivation comes from for me.
I think you're absolutely correct. It's really hard to get, particularly in bigger organizations, to get risk fully understood and communicated and articulated succinctly across all the people that need to understand it. And having that unified understanding that we're all pulling in this direction because we're all dependent on success and we all own a bit of that success.
Correct.
Is a massive leadership tool, just having an understanding of what's going on. Because if you've got this contextual understanding, you can start empowering people. But I've worked in and with some organizations where everything is such a close hold. Things are not communicated out to the team. And it's never been fully clear to me how much of that is a lack of faith in the leader's own abilities or a lack of trust, come back to the word trust that you used earlier, in the team as a whole, or whether people just not thinking about it at all in the first place. And you can end up with a very directive and non-agile organization where not enough people understand the broader context you're operating in.
Yeah, I think the point you're making there is important. And for us, it's interesting. So yeah, we purposely became and stay a small business so that we remain agile and can focus on the projects that we want to work on rather than feeling the need to take either customer client relationships or thematic work that we just don't want to do. So it then means that we can maintain a sense of like professional motivation because we're working on stuff that we want to do. And I think that is very important to maintain the motivation across the team. And that exercise and agility ends up being really useful to organizations because it means we can pivot and do things quickly, make decisions quickly, bigger than other organizations, so that if there is a capacity or capability gap, we can fill it in a timely manner. Anything from if there is a procurement that needs to be bid for, we can get a bid process done in days, whereas other organizations take weeks because there's 3, 4, 5 layers of sign off. And it's not a case of less diligence. It's because it's the same similar processes used. It's just there's less levels. It's just how many people have to agree that it's signed off. And I'm not saying either is better or worse because there are certain circumstances that you really do want that extra level of diligence and time. But I would say organizations would be well positioned if they have a different decision-making cadence, so speed of decision-making for different types of decisions. And I'll steal another one I actually heard last week was, so you've got a hat decisions. What hat will I wear today? Actually, does it matter? No, just put a hat on. And if it's the wrong hat, take the fucking hat off. That's an easy decision to make. Get on with it because you can fix it. Then there's haircut decisions. Haircut decisions are a little bit longer taking because you have to live with the consequences of the haircut decision for a while. And that haircut decision could end up in a family photo. And that's a long consequence to live with. Then there's tattoo decisions for life. You want to get tattoo decisions right. So the point here is just having that hierarchy of decision making, but having it clear what type of decision it is, agreed, Therefore, the speed and evidence required to make the decision. Because all too often we have hat decisions taking tattoo decision time and then get clogged up. Or we spend all our time on the small decisions so that when it comes to the big decisions, we either don't have the actual bandwidth in terms of people's bandwidth for capacity and time, or the emotional bandwidth left to make decisions. And usually time's running out, so big decisions get rushed. And all of a sudden, everything becomes urgent and important. Whereas if we'd done some prioritization, particularly in the decision-making hierarchy, then hopefully we can be a little bit more relatively or suitably rigorous in the decision-making.
Organizations really struggle with this, right? Like putting the appropriate level of attention and resource and brain power to making decisions. Back to your risk tolerance point as well. How much tolerance have we got for these things to go wrong? And if you're a small organization with limited cash flow, you have a lot more tattoo decisions to make than hat decisions, right?
Exactly.
Dave, you've mentioned resilience a few times through this, and you've posited a bit of a definition around it with regards to the business as well. I just wanted to talk with you a little bit more about resilience, and whether it's from a business or a personal perspective, or there is some overlap, what that means to you and what lessons you've taken over your journey to lean into being more resilient.
Thinking, because I want to articulate this clearly, because I actually see it as, for me, it's quite a complicated subject with a few layers, but I want to explain it in two ways. So there's capacity resilience and there's systemic resilience. So your system, and the two are not mutually exclusive. I'll start with capacity in my mind because it's the most simple. So you only have a finite number of resources in any organization, in any individual, in any relationship. And they can usually get broken down into three buckets. So you have the technical capability of the organization. You then have the financial capital. Then you have the emotional capital.
Mm-hmm.
Three things in the business. If you do not balance those, the business could fall over. And ultimately, any business will, yes, you'll run out of money. The likelihood is you'll be able to find someone else. You're very unlikely to run out of technical capacity unless people leave and you don't build the right team. So you've got to build the right team. You've got to maintain good business acumen and a solid business model. But then you've got to spend those, which is back to decision making and the appropriate allocation of those two capital types. But the one we should really focus on, because I think it's the one that gets underestimated, is emotional capital. And fundamentally, teams will fail, relationships will fail, marriages will fail, businesses will fall over when emotional capital depletes. When people just don't want to be there, can't remain motivated, simply can't make rational choices because they're emotionally exhausted, they will give up. Businesses don't fail, people give up. And I'm not saying that's wrong, because some of the smartest decisions you will ever make as a leader, as a team, as a partnership, as a business, is knowing when to say no. When you actually stop doing things. And for me, strategy and resilience are intrinsic, because strategy is about choosing what not to do. And resilience is about applying the correct capital at the right time. Yeah. So that's call that the energy balance side of it. But then the other element I do just want to talk about, but not delve into, because I think it's much more complicated, is the system nature, where you need resilience in your system, where you need to ultimately know that you're pointed in the right direction, you've got the tools equipment, technologies, people to be able to actually conduct what you're being asked to do or chosen to do well. And then it's designed in a way that it is not a house of cards where everything has to go right for success.
Mm-hmm.
What we need is a system which has the right resources that we just talked about, the right mission direction, and then the system, which those two are the inputs and then output two. The system in the middle needs enough, what we would have called, and a lot of people have called, like contingency, so that things can go wrong and it still works. And the key for me is that it's the balance of genuine energy, capital allocation, and then sufficient amount of what I call resilience in the system of how you conduct yourself, your behavior, your business, systems, processes, protocols, that stuff can go not as planned and the system keeps working. Another way that this can go wrong is if things are too highly structured for planning and control, things go wrong in a rigid system. And that means it doesn't have much consistency because it falls over, because all of the energy was put into the highly sophisticated planning and control mechanism. Whereas actually, resilience might be better spent having a strong structure like that, but less planning and control, so that when things go wrong, there's still some room to change, agility or agency, and then there's still some fucking energy or resources left to react to reality.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way of putting that, Dave. I think there's so many different ways of explaining this. That has captured so many different elements in a succinct and, for me, clear demonstration. I think it's fascinating, though, isn't it? And I just want to follow up with one question on this in terms of that, the business example specifically, although I do think that this does come across to individuals in their personal life as well. Some definitions of resilience would talk about survivability, and so business potentially pivoting to a different thing so the entity can keep going. I think of Kodak as being an interesting example of this. They went from the biggest camera manufacturer to then being the inventors of the first digital camera, and then they just never made that work, and they had to keep changing and adapting to try and keep some level of business going and the brand name going. They still are going in some format now, nothing like what they were. So you could argue that is a resilient organization that has survived, but it's not doing what its initial mission was. Where do you think that comes into the picture?
So the assumption is survivability is your ultimate goal. Whereas depending on if it's a business, it might not be worthwhile surviving because it might be a smarter business decision or turn a business unit off. If a product does not have product market fit, if there's not demand available, maybe it's a time to change. But if the point is to continue operating, to do good or make money, then survivability does make sense. Survivability came up in a conversation about resilience I was in actually here in Manila with a large bank. And ultimately, physical survivability is a question we have to consider here in Manila because there's a typhoon risk, there's an earthquake risk. And the assumption is what I was getting to here is what you're doing is worthwhile. Yeah. So therefore, you've got to continue the worthwhile. A lot of entities get shocks against them, and it questions, is what they were doing worthwhile? So in a business sense, everything has got to be driven by demand. So the assumption is survivability is linked to relevant or coherent demand.
Yeah, and I think this then links to like where adaptation comes into that process as well. I think another big, the other example that pops in my head is I think Nintendo started off as, I can't remember, I think it was like playing cards. It was like some sort of, it was an entertainment thing, but not digital, right? And obviously they've become one of the biggest manufacturers of games in the world. And as we're going through the shift in AI now, there's a lot of people that are going to be kicking around, a lot of businesses that are going to be kicking around, not able to keep doing exactly what they're doing because the demand won't be there, as you say. But does that mean
doing it how they're doing it?
So this is exactly it, isn't it? So are those businesses going to go under, or are they going to be adapting? And a lot of them are going to be trying to adapt, and not all of them will succeed in that.
I hear it mentioned in different contexts. I think what's super important is that the survivability came from a physical risk. It's like, how do we survive so that we can then regain and keep doing what we were doing? Then there's another question of, how do we survive so that we can then change how we're doing it? And that's a true definition of resilience, where you readapt your system so that it has more capacity or contingency within the protocols and procedures so that it can withhold more shocks. Like in our disaster relief parlance, that's build back better.
Yeah.
But build back better in business sense is better product market fit. So you're just staying alive so you can change.
And I find this fascinating because as you've mentioned there, resilience does mean it's such a awesome strength of the word, but it's also a real danger of the word, that it means so many things to so many people. But in terms of the contextual application, it is very, let's say, adaptable, shall we?
Can I make 2 recommendations? So
please.
This conversation and the articulation, I can't take full credit for either. So there's a guy called Rob Schneider, and he's at Harvard's Innovation Lab, and he's in the process of trying to challenge a lot of the startup methodologies that are used and the core assumptions. And he is challenging them to say that how we think about startups, product market fit, raising money, and a lot of the playbooks are just not right. That's not how or why stuff has worked. There's so many, that's a retrospective application of a model that people make the story fit the model.
Okay.
Whereas like when you speak to the founders, they're like, that's not why. It's some circumstantial fucking happenstance thing, or loads of resilience in the business that they survived. And this is one of the consistent themes in a lot of his posts. And I'd recommend any of your listeners, if they're in a business and they talk about what is true demand, Rob Schneider, I can send you a link so you can post it. But he talks about actually the only thing you've got to do as a startup is survive long enough to really work out what your customers want. So it's worth waiting to build the right thing. Very simply, your product has to either, or you go to a customer, they either have something on their to-do list, which they just don't want to do themselves. So they just want you to do their shit job. Yeah. Fucking sign me up. Shit jobs, shit places. Turns out we're really good at them. Number 1. Number 2 is they have something on their to-do list, which they're doing, but their current solution that they've got doesn't work. So therefore, you are then offering a way to, again, problem solve.
Yep.
And his point is, all too often, people come and they have this like sorcery, he calls it, where I'm here, and you even said it a few minutes ago, like to sell your wares. Whoa. People have got to fucking need you before you can sell yourself. This idea of like building demand is actually not quite as straightforward as most people think. Steve Jobs did not just pull the iPhone out of his arse. There was quite a bit before it, and a ruthless pursuit of this product market fit and understanding what is the problem definition. Whereas we collectively as humans and businesses tend to get quite lazy in this. What do I like doing? What can I do? How can I put it together that it looks vaguely fucking useful to someone? And then I'm going to go and whore myself. That's not a very good business model, but unfortunately, it's what a lot of people do. And then there's usually enough people who just want shit jobs off their desk that can be sustaining. But very regularly is it sustainable and scalable So therefore, usually it's not repeatable. So this idea of changing from constantly pushing yourself on people to when the demand is, we want you, that tipping point tends to be when you add true value into another organization or to a customer, where you genuinely are offering them something which makes what they're currently doing a better experience. Or I was in San Francisco in 2012. Back to this transition period, having more value now when I look at it retrospectively. And I was in what's known as a hack house. So it's one
Okay,
of these
yeah.
houses where everyone sits around 24 hours a day, full of all sorts of stimulants, trying to change the world, and then again going pitching themselves to Google, whatever. The funny thing is, though, they were mocking me because I was over at Stanford Graduate School of Business across the road, like trying to do an MBA there. And they were like, what are you doing? You're trying to commit to the past. MBAs, normal education is over. And they were like, it's going to transition to massive online course content. Education is going to be democratized. They're like, you understand computers. You're enthusiastic. They're like, don't go institutions. You're fucking wasting your life. And what did I do? Fucking walked out and got knocked down by the institution bus. And I've had another scenario where I was at a thing called Harvard Compute Fest, where they showed the first neural network to look for facial recognition with AI. And I was like, will I go back into tech or will I go into international relations? And I was like, I'll do international relations. And now I'm thinking, fuck me, what am I doing? How do I know to get myself in these opportunities where it shows the foresight? You talked about vision, but then I default to my comfort zone. And is that resilience? So I keep to my system because it does still work. It's still sustainable and it still grows. But I could have taken a step out of those worlds, or the world that we know that I've talked about here, which provided me life success. And I could have been on a rocket ship with Elon Musk to Mars. And then the question is, in a business, in an organization, you very regularly will have these decisions to make where you see opportunity with phenomenal reward, but potentially high risk, or so you think. So you're probably just scared. It's not real risk. Or you know what you know. You've got your system built already, so you trust compounding growth by being strategically rigid.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because there is risk because it's uncertainty, and that rocket ship to Mars, I'm sure, unless we destroy ourselves, humans will be sending that rocket ship in the future. But is that future within a useful time period for you and your life? And so it's hard. And also, then let's come back to the purpose piece. Is the rocket ship to Mars fulfilling the purpose needs that you have in the work, or is it fulfilling a financial requirement where you can now have the security to go and try and backfill purpose?
I think it's a good question. What I would say is, just before we hit record, I said to you I was in the north of the Philippines this weekend, or sorry, last week, with a new group of friends. And they were like, oh, so Dave, what do you do? And I was like explaining, much like I explained to you, about running a humanitarian consultancy that does some fantastic work, technical assistance, capacity development of other organizations in places all around the world, from Gaza, the Côte d'Ivoire to Moldova, all of these emergency hotspots, doing great stuff. And his first question was, his first reaction, and this is a neurosurgeon, so he's no fool. He's, oh, does that not get exhausting? And I was like, interesting. I said, really interesting, because working in high stress environments on negative subjects is exhausting. And we go back to the emotional capital, the bandwidth, and the financial capital. That's something over the last year, 2 years now, that I've had to manage my life energy very differently. And I've realized that the purpose bit, you just need to be careful that your purpose doesn't become purgatory. So there's a very short distance between obsessive purpose and punishment. And you actually need to be able to step back and think, am I actually serving the purpose? Because you know what might be much better? To go and invent the rocket ship, sell it to someone else, and then put all the profits back into my inaction and actually nudge the needle. The point here is there's a very different conversation to be had about the future of humanitarianism, the future of the purpose that we have committed our lives to, actually, we joined a system, the international system for aid and development, which is now, I think the technical term is fucked. Because why? The demand supply calculus is gone because it's just not funded. Because the point being, it was externally subsidized. No system works when the subsidy leaves because the product market fit was skewed. So there was no true resilience. There was contingency. So there's either no survivability, so of all the terminologies we have flirted with, when you apply it in the biggest sense to, is our purpose worthwhile, or is our purpose even resilient? It turns out now we're going to all collectively, as humanitarians and development folk, have to think about how do we serve our purpose via a different means.
Yeah, it's a really hard one, this, and I think there's so much change coming in terms of everything, not just the humanitarian sector, not just AI, but that whole international system. Yeah, as you say, fucked, and not going to get back on track. I think we're so far. I say back on track. There were so many issues with it anyway, so it's not like it was this perfect thing that's been torn apart. But the will behind it felt reasonably honest and integrity driven, and how the geopolitics unfolds over the next 3 to 10 years is going to be very interesting.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry, Charlie, this is important. So you alluded to, you think that the integrity and the will behind it was correct. I wonder, did it fall over because, or is it under pressure because it became bloated? It actually became past humanitarian intent. It became a professionalized, in inverted commas, bloated market. And then it was actually a business. And then money became the primary objective. Good work was being done, not being debated, but more money was being made than good work being done. So all of a sudden, the whole service, who were you serving? A lot of the time, you were serving either by direct procurement, large organizations, or by subbing, large organizations. And then you have to question if their intent was to survive or maximum service provision. And unfortunately, the system is sufficiently distorted that maximum service position wasn't survivable. So you had to be very financially astute to remain serviceable. Yeah. So I know that's a bit of a circular argument, but the most important thing is going forward, who is going to fund it?
And that is the fascinating part of this, isn't it? Because yes, you're right to very, very gracefully and graciously challenge me on a couple of pieces of that, because I think I have bundled the humanitarian and the international development sector together, and they are not the same thing. So I think that's a key point.
Yeah.
I also think that, funnily enough, there's an article in The Guardian, and it's about this very thing, the professionalization of the aid space. And I'll send it to you. All these organizations that were set up so that they were able to pass a procurement process to receive money to then supposedly go and do something, but we did not have humanitarian or development money going to the community organizations that needed it, that actually were going to make decisions effectively. It was being passed to implementation partners who thought they knew or knew what to say to meet the targets of the people who had the money, who were so far removed from the problem in the first place. So there were definitely issues in it. And yeah, I'm glad you challenged me on this, because it's something that I'm constantly trying to, like with much of the change in the world at the moment, I'm trying to find a narrative that fits my reality and my comfort zone and provides a foundation to be able to move forward, because fundamentally this is all storytelling, right? Everything is storytelling.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think one of the biggest challenges around it's governments around the world not having the ability to deal with that and provide that funding makes it extremely hard. I think the Chinese model is quite interesting. They've obviously done a lot of development, a lot of humanitarian stuff, and that has been tied to their commercial imperatives, which in turn is about the resilience of the Chinese Communist Party and then the status of their home population. So they've looked at it very holistically. Is it all to the benefit of those who have received the infrastructure, the development aid? Not necessarily in the long term. Time will tell. But there's not a great model out there. So we're going to have to experiment. But the key point for me is the will to do that experiment and whether that is there. And I think that's the big question for the humanitarian focused sector in particular. Development sector is a little bit more maybe cutthroat in terms of the economics behind it.
I heard it described to a few really important things there. So your reference to the Chinese model, I think, is fantastic, and it's a much bigger question than we have time for now. But now living here in the Philippines, China is on the doorstep.
Yeah.
And more than that, we were indoctrinated to demonize certain places and foolishly think that Britain had relevance in the world and prowess. And I'm not going to be like combative or too derogatory towards the UK, but the point is relevance in this part of the world and in the majority of the world. China is exceptionally relevant and is not a bad actor, as in fact, it's a primary development engine in a lot of places. Don't get me wrong, there's other parts of the Filipino institutions here would say they are the primary threat to national security, XYZ. So there's a lot of different bits to it. But even the Belt and Road Initiative is like seen as this grand strategic move. And it was a brilliant example because grand strategy had been lost all around since the Marshall Plan was the last time there was any grand strategic thinking. And everything had become quarterly, it had become election cycle orientated. National interest was a whim to the political party at the time. So it wasn't national interest, it was political interest. So the strategic coherence of the rules-based order has been degrading over time. So it's just managed to fall over because it wasn't resilient enough, because the rules don't work for everyone, and it's now mean a disenfranchisement. But the point of China is super clear. They had a system which brought the biggest development of a middle class and billions of people out of poverty over 30 years. There was a huge collateral damage, which may be seen as inappropriate, and that level of risk tolerance or that level of a negative consequence, planned or unplanned, would not be tolerable in a Western democratic society. But it has worked. It has transformed China. And there are many more people have benefited than not. And I'm not in any way having a political ethical argument or need one now, but it's just super interesting to hear life from different perspectives. And while I alluded to doing that travel for many years, to try and lose myself, to find myself, it's to explore other cultures and learn to be able to listen and respect what other people are saying. Back to diversity, which was one of the things. So diversity of inputs is key. Doesn't mean you have to agree. And a lot of the time you won't agree because you don't actually understand it. But that diversity of inputs will help you understand resilience. And to bring that up to context now, if you think about interconnectivity of global supply chains and resilience to shocks, it's like you've got to understand what's going on elsewhere. Because how you then plan, I would argue, how much resilience you need in your system is understanding and quantifying risk to you and relevance to you as an individual, your organization, so that you can then decide on your tolerance levels and therefore resilience to build into the system, and be careful of confusing the difference between something which is internal to your system of control, just outside your system of control, in your area of influence, or a step further than that, which is in your area of interest, where you have no influence and no control. All too often, we all focus on the big stories, which are in the area of interest to our business, to our lives, to our relationships. But actually, when you really drill it down, don't have daily or short to medium term significant relevance in your area of control. If you can't fucking do something about it, make a decision and move on. Don't keep it as a constant bleed of any of your three capitals.
That's beautifully articulated. And this is something I was talking about with a coaching client yesterday. The ability to just say, I'm worrying about this, I'm expending emotional energy on this. And the question, is this useful? So just being able to be disciplined, precise in where you're spending your time, I think, is such an important factor for being able to stay in the game for longer and enjoy it, right? Because
Back to
you've
buoyancy.
got to celebrate the successes, and if you want to find negativity, it's out there. It doesn't need a lot of effort.
Can I just throw one thing at you? I think you nailed something there now about focus. Resilience also comes from being able to focus, because by focusing allows you to most effectively or efficiently apply your resources. And it allows you to see if you've got product market fit, or how much your system that we talked about is being degraded or challenged. If you are not focused, you will then look at all of those and not quite sure what's going on, and you won't look at your context and understand it. So this the idea of I get quite frustrated and quite animated about the difference between problem definition and solution. And all too often people are just naturally think in analogies, and therefore they just think of the first thing that comes to mind. Old Daniel Kahneman talked about system one versus system 2 thinking, income system one thinking, and you do question substitution. Is my answer in the realm of relevant to this conversation or the solution? Yes, it fits. Everyone else thought, yeah, it fits, but no one really interrogates it to find out, is it actually appropriate? And then we apply that and we get on with something quickly, because people see that agility as doing something quickly rather than doing the right thing. And then the next thing you know, we're all up the fucking river without a paddle, because we've put all of our energy into something, doing a quick decision rather than the right decision.
Back to your hat, haircut, tattoo
It's not
model
far
as
off.
well, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was speaking to someone else, having one of these conversations, and we were talking about decision making and like analysis paralysis, and I quoted a bit of instruction that I got at Dartmouth, which stuck with me, which was, you know, the best thing you can do is make the right decision. The next best thing you can do is make the wrong decision, but make a decision, get on with it, and start moving. Now, that is true if you've got quite a quick feedback loop. If you don't have
100%.
quite a quick feedback loop, then it can be extremely devastating. So, yeah, I think the problem statement and the problem definition is such a key part. And I definitely concur with your observation and experience that it is too quick for people to just jump on something that seems vaguely in the ballpark, and we'll go from there, where actually a little bit more precision and a little bit more consideration would have got you to a better place ultimately quicker.
Can I just so what's super important with this then is, again, back to applying the right form of decision making at the right time. So sometimes you just actually have to do something to generate the opportunity to get feedback.
Yep.
And that's where decision paralysis comes in and is dangerous. That's ruminating. It becomes inertia. Actually, what you need to do is look for situations that can you actually get something out in the real world to get the feedback. And that's when, like, agile methods, and we talk about prototyping and then getting the feedback loop is quite important. So you can project something with a certain amount of risk because you know it's wrong, get it out there, get a solution, but the aim is to generate feedback, not claim the right solution. And this thing gets back to your storytelling, because if you do release something in your company, in your organization, into an affected population, you've got to make sure their expectations are aligned as to what it's trying to achieve. Because as humans, we assume right solutions are given to us at once. So you need to explain to them that we are going to do whatever it is to test a certain part of this. And while that is very easy to say, my experience is all too often people don't hear that and they think it's the end solution, and they're like, this is bullshit. It didn't work. So there has to be some very clear strategic communication and actual proper collaboration engagement, so that they need to be part of the solution building. So get the user as close as possible to the solution. Command of the narrative is the expectation management tool, which we use most and is most effective for humans. So it is about the story you tell. And I think it's super important going forward, because we've talked a lot about institutions as a point of the system resilience, because in the past, the strength of the institution and actually the reliability give it its resilience. Resilience used to
Yeah.
be size, strength, consistency, planning, maximum control. And it just nowadays is quite the opposite because the environments are changing more. Or are they
Yeah.
changing? I think we've just become less arrogant as humans. I think less people knew or could challenge systems. Just the market and life was less competitive. And that's why institutions were able to reign so supreme. And that's why people defaulted to the institution, because working in an institution meant collective clout. And therefore, by making the institution more, but stronger, you then gained from the institution. Whereas nowadays, with disruptive technology,
Yeah.
it turns out that individuals or very small teams can actually produce outputs in a more agile manner, much more efficiently, so therefore can start reacting to the demands much quicker. So the idea of institutions is yet again under challenge. So it's about the story you tell about yourself. We talked about CVs an hour and a half ago or whatever when we first started this. In the future, is it actually going to be the CV about the university that you came from? Or is it going to be the product that you have made and the real life experience? That's what's going to be on your CV. It's like, I have, by the time I am 25 years old, I've had 3 companies and here's my fucking revenue and my profitability. And it's my EBITDA. Maybe that's what it is.
It's wild to think about a future like that, isn't it? Because of not maybe the people that can do that, but what about the
Yeah.
people that won't be able to put those things on a CV?
Is that not what an artisan
Digital
is?
thing. Maybe.
Do you know that? So the point is they work in reality.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and I think that's the thing. You talk about
It's gonna be
vocations
interesting.
and trades and things. They have been like, we never went institutional, went for the paper. We
Yeah.
went reality. So we only ever built stuff. So we're just going back
Yeah.
to reality of building. But now everybody has to build, not
That's the thing.
hide behind institutions.
It's very interesting. I think the piece you're making about sort of the point you were making about the connectivity,
Yeah.
the technology and connectivity also means small groups can have an absolutely outsized impact on things as well. And it's a scary time, right? I think having grown up in institutions, private schools, Navy, NHS, I think I've always had a healthy skepticism about institutions. Now that they are getting challenged quite so much and they changed the world order, and I'm a bit older, it is concerning because at least I can point at them and say they were to blame for everything, right? Which was not true.
Yeah.
But again, the story you tell yourself. So yeah, it's very interesting. Dave, I think this is a great segue to just finish on a couple of further questions, seeing as we're talking about the world as it is and the potential future. So would you have any thoughts on skills or character traits that you would think are going to be absolutely essential to succeeding in the world that we're currently creating? Okay.
Storytelling. Absolutely. People have got to be able to communicate clearly, but actually, because there's such a challenge on what is good evidence and good use of evidence in any environment nowadays, the simple version that people might know is like real news versus fake news. It's quite hard to tell what the truth is. People being able to clearly storytell for your own or your company's gain or to advance their mission is essential. Of course, I'm going to say buoyancy because it's that buoyancy is like the primary resilience to stop you drowning in any scenario, whether it be emotionally or physically drowning in a market. And then I do think somewhere between like intellect, but not academic. So I think there's a big difference between academic credential and genuine intellect, because I think the intellect ties to creativity more. So I think actually people will need to enhance their critical decision making analysis. So true intellectual capacity rather than transactional capacity. So yeah, storytelling, buoyancy, and then that intellect and critical thinking.
Very good things to be developing. I'm definitely trying to work on those myself, as well as many other things. But yeah, thank you. I think it's such an interesting time, isn't it, in terms of understanding what the things you need, but it's what you've described there applicable to any context. And I think that's, again, the adaptability of it all.
So that's what I'm getting at. None of this shit is new news. It has been hyper accelerated by AI and therefore has been mainstreamed. Back to 2012, back to Daniel Pink. He wrote a book, and in the book, he talks about left brain thinking and right brain thinking. And in that left brain thinking, he has automation, Asia, and abundance. Everything which is process driven, not creativity driven, can be done by an Asian cheaper. It can be automated by a computer. And in the age of abundance, it becomes irrelevant. Whereas right brain thinkers or right brain thinking becomes the human cognitive edge. So you talk about the resilient edge. Mm. It's the cognitive edge which provides you resilience in the future, because you will have the tools to process, the tools to automate. So you've now got to be able to ask the right question, define the problems, so that then you apply the massive technology set, which it does the activity at the speed of light. So it's key that the cognitive edge is the way forward. Critical thinking and consciousness is important, because that's where the ethics will be maintained, and that's when the human connection with each other will maintain the trust, because everyone else will be able to perform. And it's about how to apply the high-performing technologies in an ethical manner, so that everyone's purposes at least coalesce at some point. If not, it becomes mass competition, and then it's just depletion of resources in all sorts of direction, and then that's Mad Max gone wrong.
Thank you, Dave. That's great advice. And so let me come to the final question. I always ask this one as a reasonably new parent. What advice would you give to a 2-year-old girl that's growing up in today's world?
Hug everyone. And don't try to grow up too quick.
That's beautiful, Dave. That's lovely. Thank you. So, Dave, let's wrap up there. You've given a lot of time to this, which I'm extremely appreciative of. If people want to reach out to you, how do they best do that?
So our company is called Artios Global, Artios Global.com. Jump on the website there. If it's something humanitarian and mind action orientated, and within that there's info app. So if it's something professional, that's probably the easiest way to get access to the team rather than just access to me. But equally, if people want to speak to me, they're welcome to give me an email on dave.luke@artiosglobal.com. Happy to continue conversations along these sides, conceptual, practical, into resilience and strategy. And that goes into business resilience, commercial strategy, as much as some of the more technical development themes that we focus on in Mind Action.
And I'll put those details in the show notes as well, so people can find that there. Dave, thank you so much. Great to see you. Great to catch up. Great to hear your thoughts on everything.
If this conversation has given you something to think about leading through pressure, navigating change, or building the kind of clarity that holds even when things get tough, that is exactly what I work on at The Resilience Edge. You can find me, Charlie Peschardt, on LinkedIn, on Instagram at The Resilience Edge Coaching, or via my website, theresilienceedge.com. Whether you're looking to think more clearly under pressure in your personal or professional life, or leading an organisation building the resilience to survive and thrive through uncertainty and change, come find me and sharpen your resilient edge.